the new god of the Disfavoredest, the new gods of the Disfavoredest, the new god of the Disfavoredest, the new goddess of the Disfavoredest, the new goddesses of the Disfavoredest, the new goddess of the Disfavoredest, the old god of the Disfavoredest, the old gods of the Disfavoredest, the old god of the Disfavoredest, the old goddess of the Disfavoredest, the old goddesses of the Disfavoredest, the old goddess of the Disfavoredest, the greater god of the Disfavoredest, the greater gods of the Disfavoredest, the greater god of the Disfavoredest, the greater goddess of the Disfavoredest, the greater goddesses of the Disfavoredest, the greater goddess of the Disfavoredest, the lesser god of the Disfavoredest, the lesser gods of the Disfavoredest, the lesser god of the Disfavoredest, the lesser goddess of the Disfavoredest, the lesser goddesses of the Disfavoredest, the lesser goddess of the Disfavoredest, the higher god of the Disfavoredest, the higher gods of the Disfavoredest, the higher god of the Disfavoredest, the higher goddess of the Disfavoredest, the higher goddesses of the Disfavoredest, the higher goddess of the Disfavoredest, the lower god of the Disfavoredest, the lower gods of the Disfavoredest, the lower god of the Disfavoredest, the lower goddess of the Disfavoredest, the lower goddesses of the Disfavoredest, the lower goddess of the Disfavoredest, the greater spirit of the Disfavoredest, the greater spirits of the Disfavoredest, the greater spirit of the Disfavoredest, the lesser spirit of the Disfavoredest, the lesser spirits of the Disfavoredest, the lesser spirit of the Disfavoredest, the higher spirit of the Disfavoredest, the higher spirits of the Disfavoredest, the higher spirit of the Disfavoredest, the lower spirit of the Disfavoredest, the lower spirits of the Disfavoredest, the lower spirit of the Disfavoredest, the major god of the Disfavoredest, the major gods of the Disfavoredest, the major god of the Disfavoredest, the major goddess of the Disfavoredest, the major goddesses of the Disfavoredest, the major goddess of the Disfavoredest, the minor god of the Disfavoredest, the minor gods of the Disfavoredest, the minor god of the Disfavoredest, the minor goddess of the Disfavoredest, the minor goddesses of the Disfavoredest, the minor goddess of the Disfavoredest, the superior god of the Disfavoredest, the superior gods of the Disfavoredest, the superior god of the Disfavoredest, the superior goddess of the Disfavoredest, the superior goddesses of the Disfavoredest, the superior goddess of the Disfavoredest, the inferior god of the Disfavoredest, the inferior gods of the Disfavoredest, the inferior god of the Disfavoredest, the inferior goddess of the Disfavoredest, the inferior goddesses of the Disfavoredest, the inferior goddess of the Disfavoredest, the ancestor god of the Disfavoredest, the ancestor gods of the Disfavoredest, the ancestor god of the Disfavoredest, the ancestor goddess of the Disfavoredest, the ancestor goddesses of the Disfavoredest, the ancestor goddess of the Disfavoredest, the ascendant god of the Disfavoredest, the ascendant gods of the Disfavoredest, the ascendant god of the Disfavoredest, the ascendant goddess of the Disfavoredest, the ascendant goddesses of the Disfavoredest, the ascendant goddess of the Disfavoredest, the descendant god of the Disfavoredest, the descendant gods of the Disfavoredest, the descendant god of the Disfavoredest, the descendant goddess of the Disfavoredest, the descendant goddesses of the Disfavoredest, the descendant goddess of the Disfavoredest, the transcendent god of the Disfavoredest, the transcendent gods of the Disfavoredest, the transcendent god of the Disfavoredest, the transcendent goddess of the Disfavoredest, the transcendent goddesses of the Disfavoredest, the transcendent goddess of the Disfavoredest, the past god of the Disfavoredest, the past gods of the Disfavoredest, the past god of the Disfavoredest, the past goddess of the Disfavoredest, the past goddesses of the Disfavoredest, the past goddess of the Disfavoredest, the present god of the Disfavoredest, the present gods of the Disfavoredest, the present god of the Disfavoredest, the present goddess of the Disfavoredest, the present goddesses of the Disfavoredest, the present goddess of the Disfavoredest, the future god of the Disfavoredest, the future gods of the Disfavoredest, the future god of the Disfavoredest, the future goddess of the Disfavoredest, the future goddesses of the Disfavoredest, the future goddess of the Disfavoredest, the authentic god of the Disfavoredest, the authentic gods of the Disfavoredest, the authentic god of the Disfavoredest, the authentic goddess of the Disfavoredest, the authentic goddesses of the Disfavoredest, the authentic goddess of the Disfavoredest, the synthetic god of the Disfavoredest, the synthetic gods of the Disfavoredest, the synthetic god of the Disfavoredest, the synthetic goddess of the Disfavoredest, the synthetic goddesses of the Disfavoredest, the synthetic goddess of the Disfavoredest, the progressive god of the Disfavoredest, the progressive gods of the Disfavoredest, the progressive god of the Disfavoredest, the progressive goddess of the Disfavoredest, the progressive goddesses of the Disfavoredest, the progressive goddess of the Disfavoredest, the regressive god of the Disfavoredest, the regressive gods of the Disfavoredest, the regressive god of the Disfavoredest, the regressive goddess of the Disfavoredest, the regressive goddesses of the Disfavoredest, the regressive goddess of the Disfavoredest, the ordinary god of the Disfavoredest, the ordinary gods of the Disfavoredest, the ordinary god of the Disfavoredest, the ordinary goddess of the Disfavoredest, the ordinary goddesses of the Disfavoredest, the ordinary goddess of the Disfavoredest, the extraordinary god of the Disfavoredest, the extraordinary gods of the Disfavoredest, the extraordinary god of the Disfavoredest, the extraordinary goddess of the Disfavoredest, the extraordinary goddesses of the Disfavoredest, the extraordinary goddess of the Disfavoredest, the static god of the Disfavoredest, the static gods of the Disfavoredest, the static god of the Disfavoredest, the static goddess of the Disfavoredest, the static goddesses of the Disfavoredest, the static goddess of the Disfavoredest, the dynamic god of the Disfavoredest, the dynamic gods of the Disfavoredest, the dynamic god of the Disfavoredest, the dynamic goddess of the Disfavoredest, the dynamic goddesses of the Disfavoredest, the dynamic goddess of the Disfavoredest, the land god of the Disfavoredest, the land gods of the Disfavoredest, the land god of the Disfavoredest, the land goddess of the Disfavoredest, the land goddesses of the Disfavoredest, the land goddess of the Disfavoredest, the sea god of the Disfavoredest, the sea gods of the Disfavoredest, the sea god of the Disfavoredest, the sea goddess of the Disfavoredest, the sea goddesses of the Disfavoredest, the sea goddess of the Disfavoredest, the sky god of the Disfavoredest, the sky gods of the Disfavoredest, the sky god of the Disfavoredest, the sky goddess of the Disfavoredest, the sky goddesses of the Disfavoredest, the sky goddess of the Disfavoredest, the god of the Disfavoredest, the gods of the Disfavoredest, the god of the Disfavoredest, the goddess of the Disfavoredest, the goddesses of the Disfavoredest, the goddess of the Disfavoredest, the half god of the Disfavoredest, the half gods of the Disfavoredest, the half god of the Disfavoredest, the half goddess of the Disfavoredest, the half goddesses of the Disfavoredest, the half goddess of the Disfavoredest, the vessel of the Disfavoredest, the vessels of the Disfavoredest, the vessel of the Disfavoredest, the name of the Disfavoredest, the names of the Disfavoredest, the name of the Disfavoredest, the person of the Disfavoredest, the persons of the Disfavoredest, the person of the Disfavoredest, the persona of the Disfavoredest, the personas of the Disfavoredest, the persona of the Disfavoredest, the personage of the Disfavoredest, the personages of the Disfavoredest, the personage of the Disfavoredest, the personality of the Disfavoredest, the personalities of the Disfavoredest, the personality of the Disfavoredest, the personification of the Disfavoredest, the personifications of the Disfavoredest, the personification of the Disfavoredest, the image of the Disfavoredest, the images of the Disfavoredest, the image of the Disfavoredest, the imagination of the Disfavoredest, the imaginations of the Disfavoredest, the imagination of the Disfavoredest, the belief of the Disfavoredest, the beliefs of the Disfavoredest, the belief of the Disfavoredest, the thought of the Disfavoredest, the thoughts of the Disfavoredest, the thought of the Disfavoredest, the word of the Disfavoredest, the words of the Disfavoredest, the word of the Disfavoredest, The action of the Disfavoredest. The actions of the Disfavoredest. The action of the Disfavoredest. The reaction of the Disfavoredest. The reactions of the Disfavoredest. The reaction of the Disfavoredest. The feeling of the Disfavoredest. The feelings of the Disfavoredest. The feeling of the Disfavoredest. The situation of the Disfavoredest. The situations of the Disfavoredest. The situation of the Disfavoredest. The circumstance of the Disfavoredest. The circumstances of the Disfavoredest. The circumstance of the Disfavoredest. The environment of the Disfavoredest. The environments of the Disfavoredest. The environment of the Disfavoredest. The relationship of the Disfavoredest. The relationships of the Disfavoredest. The relationship of the Disfavoredest. The number of the Disfavoredest. The numbers of the Disfavoredest. The number of the Disfavoredest. The formula of the Disfavoredest. The formulas of the Disfavoredest. The formula of the Disfavoredest. The equation of the Disfavoredest. The equations of the Disfavoredest. The equation of the Disfavoredest. The theory of the Disfavoredest. The theories of the Disfavoredest. The theory of the Disfavoredest. The symbol of the Disfavoredest. The symbols of the Disfavoredest. The symbol of the Disfavoredest. The color of the Disfavoredest. The colors of the Disfavoredest. The color of the Disfavoredest. The thing of the Disfavoredest. The things of the Disfavoredest. The thing of the Disfavoredest. The way of the Disfavoredest. The ways of the Disfavoredest. The way of the Disfavoredest. The place of the Disfavoredest. The places of the Disfavoredest. The place of the Disfavoredest. The time of the Disfavoredest. The times of the Disfavoredest. The time of the Disfavoredest. The event of the Disfavoredest. The events of the Disfavoredest. The event of the Disfavoredest. The result of the Disfavoredest. The results of the Disfavoredest. The result of the Disfavoredest. The crown of the Disfavoredest. The crowns of the Disfavoredest. The crown of the Disfavoredest. The throne of the Disfavoredest. The thrones of the Disfavoredest. The throne of the Disfavoredest. The Disfavoredest king. The Disfavoredest kings. The Disfavoredest kingdom. The Disfavoredest kingdoms. The Disfavoredest king subject. The Disfavoredest king subjects. The Disfavoredest king's dominion. The Disfavoredest king's dominions. The kingdom of the Disfavoredest. The kingdoms of the Disfavoredest. The kingdom of the Disfavoredest. The Disfavoredest queen. The Disfavoredest queens. The Disfavoredest queendom. The Disfavoredest queendoms. The Disfavoredest queen subject. The Disfavoredest queen subjects. The Disfavoredest queen's dominion. The Disfavoredest queen's dominions. The queendom of the Disfavoredest. The queendoms of the Disfavoredest. The queendom of the Disfavoredest. The Disfavoredest prince. The Disfavoredest princes. The Disfavoredest princedom. The Disfavoredest princedoms. The Disfavoredest prince's subject. The Disfavoredest prince's subjects. The Disfavoredest prince's dominion. The Disfavoredest prince's dominions. The princedom of the Disfavoredest. The princedoms of the Disfavoredest. The princedom of the Disfavoredest. The Disfavoredest princess. The Disfavoredest princesses. The Disfavoredest princessdom. The Disfavoredest princessdoms. The Disfavoredest princess's subject. The Disfavoredest princess's subjects. The Disfavoredest princess's dominion. The Disfavoredest princess's dominions. The princessdom of the Disfavoredest. The princessdoms of the Disfavoredest. The princessdom of the Disfavoredest. The lord of the Disfavoredest. The lords of the Disfavoredest. The lord of the Disfavoredest. The lordess of the Disfavoredest. The lordesses of the Disfavoredest. The lordess of the Disfavoredest. The priest of the Disfavoredest. The priests of the Disfavoredest. The priest of the Disfavoredest. The priestess of the Disfavoredest. The priestesses of the Disfavoredest. The priestess of the Disfavoredest. The ritual of the Disfavoredest. The rituals of the Disfavoredest. The ritual of the Disfavoredest. The shrine of the Disfavoredest. The shrines of the Disfavoredest. The shrine of the Disfavoredest. The temple of the Disfavoredest. The temples of the Disfavoredest. the temple of the Disfavoredest, the leader of the Disfavoredest, the leaders of the Disfavoredest, the leader of the Disfavoredest, the follower of the Disfavoredest, the followers of the Disfavoredest, the follower of the Disfavoredest, the natural substance of the Disfavoredest, the natural substances of the Disfavoredest, the natural substance of the Disfavoredest, the supernatural substance of the Disfavoredest, the supernatural substances of the Disfavoredest, the supernatural substance of the Disfavoredest, the temporal substance of the Disfavoredest, the temporal substances of the Disfavoredest, the temporal substance of the Disfavoredest, the spiritual substance of the Disfavoredest, the spiritual substances of the Disfavoredest, the spiritual substance of the Disfavoredest, the natural form of the Disfavoredest, the natural forms of the Disfavoredest, the natural form of the Disfavoredest, the supernatural form of the Disfavoredest, the supernatural forms of the Disfavoredest, the supernatural form of the Disfavoredest, the temporal form of the Disfavoredest, the temporal forms of the Disfavoredest, the temporal form of the Disfavoredest, the spiritual form of the Disfavoredest, the spiritual forms of the Disfavoredest, the spiritual form of the Disfavoredest, the age of the Disfavoredest, the ages of the Disfavoredest, the age of the Disfavoredest, the era of the Disfavoredest, the eras of the Disfavoredest, the era of the Disfavoredest, the awakener of the Disfavoredest, the awakeners of the Disfavoredest, the awakener of the Disfavoredest, the awakening of the Disfavoredest, the awakenings of the Disfavoredest, the awakening of the Disfavoredest, the realm of the Disfavoredest, the realms of the Disfavoredest, the realm of the Disfavoredest, the dimension of the Disfavoredest, the dimensions of the Disfavoredest, the dimension of the Disfavoredest, the zone of the Disfavoredest, the zones of the Disfavoredest, the zone of the Disfavoredest, the frequency of the Disfavoredest, the frequencies of the Disfavoredest, the frequency of the Disfavoredest, the century of the Disfavoredest, the centuries of the Disfavoredest, the century of the Disfavoredest, the millennium of the Disfavoredest, the millenniums of the Disfavoredest, the millennium of the Disfavoredest, the purpose of the Disfavoredest, the purposes of the Disfavoredest, the purpose of the Disfavoredest, the meaning of the Disfavoredest, the meanings of the Disfavoredest, the meaning of the Disfavoredest, the culture of the Disfavoredest, the cultures of the Disfavoredest, the culture of the Disfavoredest, the demonstrator of the Disfavoredest, the demonstrators of the Disfavoredest, the demonstrator of the Disfavoredest, the demonstration of the Disfavoredest, the demonstrations of the Disfavoredest, the demonstration of the Disfavoredest, the manifester of the Disfavoredest, the manifestors of the Disfavoredest, the manifester of the Disfavoredest, the manifestation of the Disfavoredest, the manifestations of the Disfavoredest, the manifestation of the Disfavoredest, the presence of the Disfavoredest, the presences of the Disfavoredest, the presence of the Disfavoredest, the glow of the Disfavoredest, the glows of the Disfavoredest, the glow of the Disfavoredest, the goal of the Disfavoredest, the goals of the Disfavoredest, the goal of the Disfavoredest, the plan of the Disfavoredest, the plans of the Disfavoredest, the plan of the Disfavoredest, the book of the Disfavoredest, the books of the Disfavoredest, the book of the Disfavoredest, the philosopher of the Disfavoredest, the philosophers of the Disfavoredest, the philosopher of the Disfavoredest, the philosophy of the Disfavoredest, the philosophies of the Disfavoredest, the philosophy of the Disfavoredest, the releaser of the Disfavoredest, the releasers of the Disfavoredest, the releaser of the Disfavoredest, the release of the Disfavoredest, the releases of the Disfavoredest, the release of the Disfavoredest, the variable of the Disfavoredest, the variables of the Disfavoredest, the variable of the Disfavoredest, the cause of the Disfavoredest, the causes of the Disfavoredest, the cause of the Disfavoredest, the effect of the Disfavoredest, the effects of the Disfavoredest, the effect of the Disfavoredest, the journey of the Disfavoredest, the journeys of the Disfavoredest, the journey of the Disfavoredest, the emergence of the Disfavoredest, the emergences of the disfavoredest, the emergence of the disfavoredest, the source of the disfavoredest, the sources of the disfavoredest, the source of the disfavoredest, the originator of the disfavoredest, the originators of the disfavoredest, the originator of the disfavoredest, the origin of the disfavoredest, the origins of the disfavoredest, the origin of the disfavoredest, the forefather of the disfavoredest, the forefathers of the disfavoredest, the forefather of the disfavoredest, the foremother of the disfavoredest, the foremothers of the disfavoredest, the foremother of the disfavoredest, the ancestor of the disfavoredest, the ancestors of the disfavoredest, the ancestor of the disfavoredest, the descendant of the disfavoredest, the descendants of the disfavoredest, the descendant of the disfavoredest, the lineage of the disfavoredest, the lineages of the disfavoredest, the lineage of the disfavoredest, the heritage of the disfavoredest, the heritages of the disfavoredest, the heritage of the disfavoredest, the heir of the disfavoredest, the heirs of the disfavoredest, the heir of the disfavoredest, the co-heir of the disfavoredest, the co-heirs of the disfavoredest, the co-heir of the disfavoredest, the joint heir of the disfavoredest, the joint heirs of the disfavoredest, the joint heir of the disfavoredest, the dynasty of the disfavoredest, the dynasties of the disfavoredest, the dynasty of the disfavoredest, the force of the disfavoredest, the forces of the disfavoredest, the force of the disfavoredest, the law of the disfavoredest, the laws of the disfavoredest, the law of the disfavoredest, the pact of the disfavoredest, the pacts of the disfavoredest, the pact of the disfavoredest, the game of the disfavoredest, the games of the disfavoredest, the game of the disfavoredest, the mask of the disfavoredest, the masks of the disfavoredest, the mask of the disfavoredest, the armor of the disfavoredest, the armors of the disfavoredest, the armor of the disfavoredest, the sword of the disfavoredest, the swords of the disfavoredest, the sword of the disfavoredest, the shield of the disfavoredest, the shields of the disfavoredest, the shield of the disfavoredest, the force shield of the disfavoredest, the force shields of the disfavoredest, the force shield of the disfavoredest, the armored force shield of the disfavoredest, the armored force shields of the disfavoredest, the armored force shield of the disfavoredest, the champion of the disfavoredest, the champions of the disfavoredest, the champion of the disfavoredest, the guardian of the disfavoredest, the guardians of the disfavoredest, the guardian of the disfavoredest, the defender of the disfavoredest, the defenders of the disfavoredest, the defender of the disfavoredest, the protector of the disfavoredest, the protectors of the disfavoredest, the protector of the disfavoredest, the chant of the disfavoredest, the chants of the disfavoredest, the chant of the disfavoredest, the shape of the disfavoredest, the shapes of the disfavoredest, the shape of the disfavoredest, the cube of the disfavoredest, the cubes of the disfavoredest, the cube of the disfavoredest, the cuboid of the disfavoredest, the cuboids of the disfavoredest, the cuboid of the disfavoredest, the sphere of the disfavoredest, the spheres of the disfavoredest, the sphere of the disfavoredest, the spheroid of the disfavoredest, the spheroids of the disfavoredest, the spheroid of the disfavoredest, the prism of the disfavoredest, the prisms of the disfavoredest, the prism of the disfavoredest, the pyramid of the disfavoredest, the pyramids of the disfavoredest, the pyramid of the disfavoredest, the cylinder of the disfavoredest, the cylinders of the disfavoredest, the cylinder of the disfavoredest, the cone of the disfavoredest, the cones of the disfavoredest, the cone of the disfavoredest, the triangle of the disfavoredest, the triangles of the disfavoredest, the triangle of the disfavoredest, the circle of the disfavoredest, the circles of the disfavoredest, the circle of the disfavoredest, the semicircle of the disfavoredest, the semicircles of the disfavoredest, the semicircle of the disfavoredest, the square of the disfavoredest, the squares of the disfavoredest, the square of the disfavoredest, the rectangle of the disfavoredest, the rectangles of the disfavoredest, the rectangle of the disfavoredest, the parallelogram of the disfavoredest, The parallelograms of the Disfavoredest. The parallelogram of the Disfavoredest. The rhombus of the Disfavoredest. The rhombuses of the Disfavoredest. The rhombus of the Disfavoredest. The trapezoid of the Disfavoredest. The trapezoids of the Disfavoredest. The trapezoid of the Disfavoredest. The polygon of the Disfavoredest. The polygons of the Disfavoredest. The polygon of the Disfavoredest. The pentagon of the Disfavoredest. The pentagons of the Disfavoredest. The pentagon of the Disfavoredest. The hexagon of the Disfavoredest. The hexagons of the Disfavoredest. The hexagon of the Disfavoredest. The septagon of the Disfavoredest. The septagons of the Disfavoredest. The septagon of the Disfavoredest. The octagon of the Disfavoredest. The octagons of the Disfavoredest. The octagon of the Disfavoredest. The nonagon of the Disfavoredest. The nonagons of the Disfavoredest. The nonagon of the Disfavoredest. The decagon of the Disfavoredest. The decagons of the Disfavoredest. The decagon of the Disfavoredest. The evolution of the Disfavoredest. The evolutions of the Disfavoredest. The evolution of the Disfavoredest. The revolution of the Disfavoredest. The revolutions of the Disfavoredest. The revolution of the Disfavoredest. The elemental art of the Disfavoredest. The elemental arts of the Disfavoredest. The elemental art of the Disfavoredest. The elemental science of the Disfavoredest. The elemental sciences of the Disfavoredest. The elemental science of the Disfavoredest. The elemental principle of the Disfavoredest. The elemental principles of the Disfavoredest. The elemental principle of the Disfavoredest. The elemental technology of the Disfavoredest. The elemental technologies of the Disfavoredest. The elemental technology of the Disfavoredest. The low elemental art of the Disfavoredest. The low elemental arts of the Disfavoredest. The low elemental art of the Disfavoredest. The low elemental science of the Disfavoredest. The low elemental sciences of the Disfavoredest. The low elemental science of the Disfavoredest. The low elemental principle of the Disfavoredest. The low elemental principles of the Disfavoredest. The low elemental principle of the Disfavoredest. The low elemental technology of the Disfavoredest. The low elemental technologies of the Disfavoredest. The low elemental technology of the Disfavoredest. The high elemental art of the Disfavoredest. The high elemental arts of the Disfavoredest. The high elemental art of the Disfavoredest. The high elemental science of the Disfavoredest. The high elemental sciences of the Disfavoredest. The high elemental science of the Disfavoredest. The high elemental principle of the Disfavoredest. The high elemental principles of the Disfavoredest. The high elemental principle of the Disfavoredest. The high elemental technology of the Disfavoredest. The high elemental technologies of the Disfavoredest. The high elemental technology of the Disfavoredest. The agent of the Disfavoredest. The agents of the Disfavoredest. The agent of the Disfavoredest. The agency of the Disfavoredest. The agencies of the Disfavoredest. The agency of the Disfavoredest. The amplifier of the Disfavoredest. The amplifiers of the Disfavoredest. The amplifier of the Disfavoredest. The amplification of the Disfavoredest. The amplifications of the Disfavoredest. The amplification of the Disfavoredest. The enhancer of the Disfavoredest. The enhancers of the Disfavoredest. The enhancer of the Disfavoredest. The enhancement of the Disfavoredest. The enhancements of the Disfavoredest. The enhancement of the Disfavoredest. The magnifier of the Disfavoredest. The magnifiers of the Disfavoredest. The magnifier of the Disfavoredest. The magnification of the Disfavoredest. The magnifications of the Disfavoredest. The magnification of the Disfavoredest. The influencer of the Disfavoredest. The influencers of the Disfavoredest. The influencer of the Disfavoredest. The influence of the Disfavoredest. The influences of the Disfavoredest. The influence of the Disfavoredest. The emanator of the Disfavoredest. The emanators of the Disfavoredest. The emanator of the Disfavoredest. The emanation of the Disfavoredest. The emanations of the Disfavoredest. The emanation of the Disfavoredest. The converger of the Disfavoredest. The convergers of the Disfavoredest. The converger of the Disfavoredest. The convergence of the disfavoredest. The convergences of the disfavoredest. The convergence of the disfavoredest. The aura of the disfavoredest. The auras of the disfavoredest. The aura of the disfavoredest. The impression of the disfavoredest. The impressions of the disfavoredest. The impression of the disfavoredest. The intelligence of the disfavoredest. The intelligences of the disfavoredest. The intelligence of the disfavoredest. The sophistication of the disfavoredest. The sophistications of the disfavoredest. The sophistication of the disfavoredest. The genius of the disfavoredest. The geniuses of the disfavoredest. The genius of the disfavoredest. The polymath of the disfavoredest. The polymaths of the disfavoredest. The polymath of the disfavoredest. The psychic of the disfavoredest. The psychics of the disfavoredest. The psychic of the disfavoredest. The knowledge of the disfavoredest. The knowledges of the disfavoredest. The knowledge of the disfavoredest. The understanding of the disfavoredest. The understandings of the disfavoredest. The understanding of the disfavoredest. The wisdom of the disfavoredest. The wisdoms of the disfavoredest. The wisdom of the disfavoredest. The secret of the disfavoredest. The secrets of the disfavoredest. The secret of the disfavoredest. The mystery of the disfavoredest. The mysteries of the disfavoredest. The mystery of the disfavoredest. The revelation of the disfavoredest. The revelations of the disfavoredest. The revelation of the disfavoredest. The tactic of the disfavoredest. The tactics of the disfavoredest. The tactic of the disfavoredest. The strategy of the disfavoredest. The strategies of the disfavoredest. The strategy of the disfavoredest. The strength of the disfavoredest. The strengths of the disfavoredest. The strength of the disfavoredest. The might of the disfavoredest. The mights of the disfavoredest. The might of the disfavoredest. The power of the disfavoredest. The powers of the disfavoredest. The power of the disfavoredest. The authority of the disfavoredest. The authorities of the disfavoredest. The authority of the disfavoredest. The dominion of the disfavoredest. The dominions of the disfavoredest. The dominion of the disfavoredest. The rhythm of the disfavoredest. The rhythms of the disfavoredest. The rhythm of the disfavoredest. The melody of the disfavoredest. The melodies of the disfavoredest. The melody of the disfavoredest. The music of the disfavoredest. The musics of the disfavoredest. The music of the disfavoredest. The lyric of the disfavoredest. The lyrics of the disfavoredest. The lyric of the disfavoredest. The song of the disfavoredest. The songs of the disfavoredest. The song of the disfavoredest. The dance of the disfavoredest. The dances of the disfavoredest. The dance of the disfavoredest. The spirit of the disfavoredest. The spirits of the disfavoredest. The spirit of the disfavoredest. The soul of the disfavoredest. The souls of the disfavoredest. The soul of the disfavoredest. The body of the disfavoredest. The bodies of the disfavoredest. The body of the disfavoredest. The mark of the disfavoredest. The marks of the disfavoredest. The mark of the disfavoredest. The promise of the disfavoredest. The promises of the disfavoredest. The promise of the disfavoredest. The visionary of the disfavoredest. The visionaries of the disfavoredest. The visionary of the disfavoredest. The vision of the disfavoredest. The visions of the disfavoredest. The vision of the disfavoredest. The picture of the disfavoredest. The pictures of the disfavoredest. The picture of the disfavoredest. The sound of the disfavoredest. The sounds of the disfavoredest. The sound of the disfavoredest. The tongue of the disfavoredest. The tongues of the disfavoredest. The tongue of the disfavoredest. The language of the disfavoredest. The languages of the disfavoredest. The language of the disfavoredest. The communication of the disfavoredest. The communications of the disfavoredest. The communication of the disfavoredest. The people of the disfavoredest. The peoples of the disfavoredest. The people of the disfavoredest. The society of the disfavoredest. The societies of the disfavoredest. The society of the disfavoredest. The fortress of the disfavoredest. The fortresses of the disfavoredest. The fortress of the disfavoredest. The government of the disfavoredest. The governments of the disfavoredest. the government of the Disfavoredest, the city of the Disfavoredest, the cities of the Disfavoredest, the city of the Disfavoredest, the nation of the Disfavoredest, the nations of the Disfavoredest, the nation of the Disfavoredest, the civilization of the Disfavoredest, the civilizations of the Disfavoredest, the civilization of the Disfavoredest, the world of the Disfavoredest, the worlds of the Disfavoredest, the world of the Disfavoredest,